Happy Thanksgiving week. This is the week for Thanksgiving, and I'm not talking about Thanksgiving today, so that'll have to wait. But what I do want to talk about is something that came up at one of our discussion groups. And if you've ever been a part of the women's discussion group or the men's discussion group, you will know that I like to start each gathering by having us go around the table and introduce ourselves, their first name, and then to answer some question that I have proposed to the group. And sometimes the question might seem a little silly, like I asked once what your favorite cup of coffee was. But once you start hearing about the impact that that day had and that cup of coffee, it doesn't sound so silly anymore. But I do this because every person has a voice. Everyone deserves in the group to be able to say something and to be recognized and to be listened to. And some in the group never want to talk much, they just want to be there. And so this gives everybody a chance to talk. So at the men's group on Tuesday, I arrived at 10. I'd been there earlier, but I was getting some stuff ready. And when I came in, the men were already going around the table and asking, they already had asked a question, and they were already discussing it, which I thought was fascinating. They're already doing it. And the question was, do you have grandchildren? And if you have grandchildren, do they attend church? If you have grandchildren, do they attend church? It was an interesting question and interesting discussion to go with it. And what we found is that those with grandchildren, 100% of them were not attending church, but nor was 0% of them. It was somewhere right in the middle, which is a very good Anglican way of doing it. So something down the middle, in the middle between those two. And it led me to do some more thinking. And part of what I'm thinking about is what you all have been inundated with information about the supposed decline of the church. Pew Research, Barna Research, others have been doing research to talk about what appears to be a decline in the church. And both discussion groups have been wanting to talk about that, and so I figured this would be a good time to do it. And the reason why is today's Christ the King Sunday. Jesus was hanging on a cross. Were any of you, by the way, surprised that we hear a lesson that normally we hear on Good Friday? Why in the world is it on Christ the King Sunday? It's a whole different sermon. 3 years from now, you'll get that sermon. So just mark it on your calendar. We'll hear about that, but not today. So what's going on? What's going on in the church and with attendance? And so I wrote down some numbers. So Pew Research is the one that's really leading this, and they wrote that in 2015 they surveyed 35,000 people, and they found that 23% of those surveyed belong to a church called None. No, not the ones that wear black robes and, you say sister to, N-O-N-E, that they belong to a church of none. They have no church. So when they write, what is your church affiliation, they would simply check off the box that said none, okay? This survey was done in identical form in 2007, and it had 16%. This survey originally was done in 1980. I don't know if you knew this. In 1980, the number of people responding to having a church of none was 8%. So 8% in 1980, 16% in 2007, 23% in 2015. For those that are into exponential numbers, you're starting to understand the graph, and that at a certain point, 2062, some are saying, the number of people not attending church or not affiliating with the church will be 100%. I don't think that's true, but that's what the numbers are bearing out. And so I wanted to talk a little more about this. If we can start back in the beginning, Abraham, the father of the faith, Abraham, Genesis chapter 18, he was looking around and he prayed to God, are there 10 righteous people around me? In this whole land, 10 righteous people. Okay? So he had that. Elijah also claimed to God that he was the last prophet. There are no other prophets besides me. I am it. That's what he was praying to God. Although at the time, most likely, he was the only prophet. He has not been the only prophet since then. And so we have a tradition of looking around and wondering what's happening. So For fun of it, I thought I would do a little more research. And in 1776 in this country, does that number sound familiar? 1776? All right. 17% of the population in the colonies attended church. 17%. Church of none, 83%. Okay? We don't talk about this much in our history books, but it's there. How do we know this? So churches keep records. They do. And the churches have how many people attend on every Sunday. We do that now today. Also, a census was done in 1776 to find out, or actually 75, to find out how many people were in the colonies. So we had a good idea of how many people were there. We have a very good idea of who showed up to church, and 17% of the people were attending church. Now, you might say, but what about the evangelical preachers? What about the pop-up churches? It didn't exist in 1776, folks. It wasn't a thing like it is now, where you drive along, you see signs, people are popping up churches all over. That wasn't the case. A census was done in 1850. And for those that are into history, 1850 is also an important year in U.S. history. 34% of the population in 1850 attended church. 66% did not. Is this different than what you're remembering? Does this sound a little strange? The high water mark for church attendance was in you probably could tell me this, 1959, right? That was the high water mark of people surveyed and of church attendance based on U.S. population. 49% of the U.S. population attended church once in 7 days. 49%, high water mark. All right? So, what in the world is happening? Okay, I have some other notes. I'm just going to throw it in there. In 1940, 37% of the people were attending church. 2015, 37% of the people were attending church. Okay, just to give an idea, 1940 to 1915, same number. So, what in the world is happening? Why in 1980 did 8% of people say, I have no church? Why in 2017, 16%? Why in 2015 do we have 23%? And I think it's because the church is losing its influence and power over society in the sense of making people feel bad that they're not in church. I think that in 1980, they were not being honest. I think in 1980 they said, well, I belong to this church. Like if I were to go to church, I would, go to this one. But they don't. And then I think in 2007, more people were coming to grips with saying, I don't attend church. And then likewise in 2015. I think we're getting more honest, folks. And I think we're getting more comfortable. And I think that's okay. In 1959, 49% of the people attending church once every 7 days. If you were to go and play tennis on Sunday morning at the golf club, at the tennis club right over here, 1959, 9 a.m. Sunday morning, somebody might say something. Somebody might look at you a little weird, like you're not in church, you're out playing tennis, okay? Unless, of course, you're Jewish, and then that's all fine. 1959, if you decided to go see a movie, say at 11 o'clock, right? There's no movie at 11 o'clock Sunday morning in 1959. What about 1959? You had a choice. I have to bring my kids to baseball because they've got a game, or I should bring them to church. That didn't happen in 1959. What was open, right? What was available between those hours? There's a shift. And again, I don't think this is a bad shift. So now the church, in some ways, might be competing with baseball. It might be competing with tennis. It might be. Today is a gorgeous day. It is beautiful. It rained last night, right? And now it's beautiful temperature. It's perfect. Yet you're here. This is really good news. You're here. You're attending. There are a plethora of other things you could do. I am competing with CBS Sunday Morning right now, right, on TV. I'm competing with coffee. I'm competing with a newspaper. Those are things. I'm competing with sleeping in, right? That's amazing. And you're here. I think this is good news. And I'm going to tell you why it's good news. I'm going to go down a little path that isn't as comfortable. And that is, we have to look at Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, in his lesson this morning, in the lesson we had this morning, he said, "Watch out, you shepherds who scatter my sheep." Watch out. The older translation, "Woe to you shepherds who scatter my sheep." There are theologians who will write that said when Jeremiah said shepherd, he meant king. So woe to you kings who are scattering and separating out my people. Okay, maybe. When you think shepherd, are you thinking king or are you thinking religious leader? I think religious leader. Woe to you shepherds who find there's child sexual abuse in your church and you do nothing to stop it. Woe to you shepherds who turn people away because of how they orient themselves in the world. Woe to you shepherds who make up church rules that scatter and send out my people. The first parish where I served as rector was on the south gate of Camp Pendleton, which is the largest Marines facility in the country, maybe in the world, I'm not sure. So we had a lot of Marines, of course, on Sunday morning, and they are special people, and I was just honored to be with them. We started noticing we're doing a lot of baptisms, and the baptisms started to grow and grow. And what happened is that there were 2 Roman Catholic chaplains on the base, and when a Roman Catholic couple would come to them for their child to be baptized, if they could not prove that they were married inside of a Roman Catholic church, the pastors told them, "No, I will not baptize your child unless you've been married in a Roman Catholic church." Woe to you, shepherds. Woe to you, shepherds. Watch out. So we started baptizing Roman Catholic children. They were like, "We're probably going to raise them in the Roman Catholic Church." And I'm like, if you decide not to, the Episcopal Church welcomes you, right? It's just fine. It used to be that if one member of the family was Roman Catholic and one was Protestant, but you swore that you would raise your child in the Roman Catholic faith and church, they would baptize you. But that seems to have gone out the window, at least it did, in Camp Pendleton between the years of 2009 and 2012. I don't know what's doing now. Woe to you, shepherds. We have another family that joined the church, became very active, and it's one of those families that it's hard to imagine how your church could operate without them. Their first Sunday at Grace, the name of the church, was because the previous Sunday was at a auditorium down the street that seats 2,000 people, and they get about 1,500 in. There's a rock band, there's smoke machines. I'm not making that up. There are smoke machines, big screens. There's no cross, there's no flowers, and nothing to indicate that it's anything other than an auditorium, but you get the idea. And they're wildly successful if you look at attendance numbers. And the pastor on that Sunday, their last Sunday there, his whole sermon involved a light bulb and a light socket and said, "This is how God has put us together." And they said, that theology, that's not deep enough. That's pretty narrow, right? They started backing up from the church. And the mom said, "The pastor, does he know that seahorses carry the young? The male seahorses carry," does he not understand how asexual reproduction works? Does he not? That's not all how God has put this together. And so the Episcopal Church welcomed them. Woe to you, shepherds. We have a family in our neighborhood where we live that they're contemplating the Episcopal Church, and they're contemplating it because their church that they attend and used to attend in Bradenton would hand out voting forms of how one should vote. And it's on a very particular way of thinking. And it doesn't matter which way it is. They don't think a church should be doing that. Even though they agree with a lot of what the church was saying and how you should vote, they were like, that's not what the church should be doing. Woe to you, shepherds who scatter. When I look at these numbers, and I'm thinking 23% of the population says they belong to a church of none. after all we've done. I think that's a pretty good news. It's just 23%. Do you remember the preacher who said, God told me I need to raise $4 million, and if I don't, God will kill me? Do you remember that? So did they. Do you remember Jim, Tammy Baker? Remember them? Yeah, so do I. Salvation isn't a moment in time. Salvation isn't where somebody says, reach out and touch your screen of your TV and you will be saved. Salvation is a journey. Salvation takes time. Salvation is a walk. Woe to you, shepherds. So today's gospel lesson is brought to you by the Gospel of Luke. Luke is number 3 in order in the New Testament. So it's Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. At the time that the New Testament was put together, and I shared with this before about John, that John almost didn't make it into the Bible. Luke almost didn't make it into the Bible. It was almost Matthew and Mark. Why didn't Luke make it? Because of what we read today. There was a thief who turned to Jesus, and he said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise. No baptism, no confirmation, no pledge card, no serving on the vestry, no serving as an usher or singing in the choir, none of that, right? No communion. It was, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom, you will be with me in paradise today, says Jesus. And the church thought this was dangerous. Because what about the structure? What about the order? What about bringing people in and putting them in through a particular way of thinking and believing? I mean, if it is just simply, you look at Jesus and you say, remember me when you come in your kingdom, and that's it? Yeah, but what if it is? What if that's it? What if everything we do leads us to that moment? What if Jesus is in an electric chair with the person who is in the electric chair, waiting? And that guy says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. What if Jesus is waiting in the hospital bed in hospice as we are taking our last few breaths? What if Jesus is there with us and we say, remember me, Lord, when you come into your kingdom? What if Jesus is there right as that big truck is making a left turn in front of you and he's waiting? What if Jesus is with us as we're dying of cancer? What if he's with us as we die in an automobile accident? What if he is there present with us? Because there were 2 criminals that were crucified, and Jesus was too. And in Jesus' pain and everything associated with crucifixion, the man said, Jesus, remember me. And he said, I will. What if that was the church? Because I think it is. Now, I love Holy Communion. I love baptism. Confirmation is awesome. We're going to have a great time together it's going to be good. And these are all very important things. Pledge cards are what keep the movement of this church going, right? This is all very important stuff. Without a choir, we would be missing out. With ushers, we'd be missing. Without our altar guild, where would we be? Where would we be without the Episcopal Church women, right? These are all very important things. And salvation is a journey and not necessarily a moment. And so it makes me wonder that the criminal that was on one side of him, that derided Jesus and made fun of him and wouldn't turn his heart to him, and then one did. It makes me wonder what's happening in the life of the one who turned away. Was there a shepherd in his life that turned him away as well? Was there a rabbi or a priest or whoever that had scattered him, and so his heart was closed off to God? Or with the one who said, Jesus, remember me, maybe there was a pastor or a person of faith in his life that had him, even though he led a poor life that ended up on a cross, some seed was instilled in him so that he could recognize who God was and to say, remember me. That's it. So we are the ones planting seeds, and we're the ones that are ushering others along. And I have some more good news. If you look with Jeremiah, and I've been focusing on the first part, watch out, you shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture. But then we need to move to the good news. When God says, I will, it is the strongest I will that we can imagine. God upholds God's promises. This is what we accept in faith. And so when God says this, I myself will gather the remaining sheep from the countries where they've been driven. I will place them back into their pasture. They will be fruitful and multiply. I will place over them shepherds who care for them. Then they will no longer be afraid. They will not dread harm, nor will any be missing, declares the Lord. I will bring them back to their pasture. None will be missing, says the Lord. This is good news. God is out delivering and out gathering. And as the church or as the bakers or whoever seems to be scattering people, as we are being conflicted by what we do on Sunday morning and as we wonder what's happening with our grandkids, just know God says, I will bring them back to their pasture. I will place over them shepherds who care for them. They will no longer be afraid, nor will any be missing. So if you are worried about your grandchildren and church, if you're worried about what appears to be a greater growing number of people that are not attending church, hold fast to the words of the Lord. I will gather them. None of them will be missing. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now turning to page 5 in your bulletin, I invite you to stand as you're able.